So, first of all, what is working memory? Well, working memory is also sometimes called short-term memory, and it's sort of a combination of storing, new incoming information, plus some type of cognitive manipulation of it during a brief period of consciousness. And it's interesting. We are able to hold only so many kinds of things in mind at once, typically. Generally around 7 items we can hold in mind, plus or minus 2. So if you can hold 5 in mind, pretty well, that's great. If you could hold like 9, that's excellent. But it seems to be a relatively stable property, like 7 plus or minus 2 items you can hold in mind. If you think about a telephone number, for example, that's part of you've got usually. If you're not having the area code, you've got 7 numbers, right? Basically for a phone number. What's interesting though is that we can do this thing. It's a mnemonic device. It's a way to improve our memory. We tend to chunk items together. So if you do think about a phone number, for example, the area code 503, you don't think about that or remember it necessarily as 5 plus 0 plus 3. It doesn't have to take up 3 of those 7 plus or minus 2 items you can hold in working memory. It's just one thing, the area code. It can be chunked, is what they say, together. We have some information about the importance of the frontal lobes of our brains in terms of working memory because of a natural experiment, a terrible incident that happened to a railway worker in New England named Phineas Gage. He's a very famous kind of individual in the history of memory research and in the history of psychology. Phineas Gage, was working, on, blasting out rock to put down a railway, and he was using an iron rod, a tamping rod, to tamp down gunpowder in the holes that had been drilled so you could blast out rock. And you're supposed to put a piece of paper or cloth between the iron tamping rod and the gunpowder that you're putting into the hole, so that if there's you're not going to get a spark that'll set it off. And he forgot to put down that cloth or paper apparently, and when it sparked when he tamped down, that rod shot out and entered. This is a 3D print of Phineas Gage's skull here. It shot straight up, through. Part below his eye here, and went straight through the top of his skull, shot right out of it. And actually, we can see this is actually a 3D print of his skull. So there's the remaining hole that was left in the bone of the skull. And then you can sort of see in the brain, too, there was quite a significant hole and significant damage that was done, basically to the frontal lobe. And Phineas Gage reportedly had been, actually very much liked and respected by the crew that he was working with on the railway, and was very was able to sequence tasks and schedule things and meet obligations, have rather terrific working memory, and then he was also very well liked. And afterwards he was described initially as being very impulsive, forgetful. He couldn't keep things kind of in sequence. He could still do, sort of complex tasks, sort of habits, basically engage in that, but to kind of organize new information and, cognitively manipulate it. He had some significant issues. He could perseverate and stick on the same thing and have difficulty shifting to new approaches, to dealing with something. For example, he had trouble updating what he was doing based upon new information that he'd be, sort of working with in memory. And what's interesting about Phineas Gage is that, subsequent kind of scholarship has revealed that he actually recovered quite a bit. So he actually regained a lot of his, abilities as, as he got further and further away from the actual accident. But he definitely had some pretty significant issues with working memory, after, losing and damaging, a significant, part of his frontal lobe. Again, perseveration, that sort of sticking with the same approach despite new evidence that, you should work with to change and shift, to a new approach. He was easy to distract, for example, and a lot of difficulty with sort of planning behavior and sort of sequencing or timing behaviors,